So anyway, I want to welcome you all to the panel on tenure and publishing. My name is Sharon Austin. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Florida. I'm also on the editorial team for the American Political Science Review. And so today I've asked some people who are all involved in both book and journal publishing to just give you some advice about, here comes Valeria, let me let her in, about just the publishing process. So we're going to begin. I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves, but we're going to begin with Aaron Javsicas of Temple University Press. I have the pleasure of working with him because he's given me a contract for my upcoming book. I know, Pearl, you've worked with him as well. And so he'll be talking about some of the resources there. And also we have other members of NCOBPS who are involved with different journals. Pearl Ford Dowe and Andra Gillespie, both of Emory University, are both editors of the National Review of Black Politics Journal. And Nadia Brown, who all of them also have published their own books as well. Nadia Brown also has published books. Nadia, you can also tell us about the book. Hasn't your book, I think, just been published, your newest one, at Purdue University. She is about to go to Georgetown University. She also is an editor for Politics, Groups, and Identities. Valeria Sinclair-Chapman also was one of the editors of Politics, Groups, and Identities, and she and I both are on the editorial team for the American Political Science Review. So we just wanted to give you some advice about publishing your work. And then also, hopefully, if you have questions, you can ask us. And then also we want to talk to you, just give you advice about the tenure process as well, because all of us have been through that process. So I'll go ahead and just defer to Aaron. So you can introduce yourself again, Aaron, if you like, of Temple University Press.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to share my screen too, and I've got a few slides here. So let's see. Is that displaying publishing your first book? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm Aaron Javsicas. I'm editor-in-chief at Temple University Press, and I see I've got a few authors in the audience here. Kenesha Grant is also here, who did her first book with us. And so yeah, so this is, as Sharon indicated, what I'm talking about publishing your first book. I realize some here may have more experience, and so some of this may be a little bit basic or a little bit elementary, but hopefully we will have a little time for questions at the end, and I can get into more detail on some of this if people have other concerns or questions or ideas. So a little bit about Temple University Press. We were founded in 1969. We've got about 1,400 books in print. We think of ourselves as a humanities and qualitative social sciences publisher. We also have a trade side, a general interest side that focuses on the Philadelphia region. And we're, broadly speaking, a social change press. That's what we've been called, and that's what we call ourselves. Excuse me for 1 second. So, sorry, I'm having a little trouble here with my screen. 1 second.
While he works on that, sorry, I mispronounced your last name, Aaron.
Okay, is my screen not shared anymore?
No, I don't. Well, here it is.
There it is. Okay, sorry about that. So for a lot of people, your first book is going to be based on your dissertation. Your dissertation is done. You've got a few options. You could turn it into a series of articles. You could turn it into a digital book project, a digital project. You could forget about it completely, which I think some people do. Or you could turn it into a book. And of course, that's what we're focused on here. And of course, all of this applies, to books that are if your first book is a non-dissertation project as well. So kind of a broad overview of the academic publishing landscape. You've got your big commercial textbook publishers like Pearson, McGraw-Hill that are focused on sort of freshman, sophomore level introductory textbooks. I used to work for W.W. Norton. That's another one that does that kind of book. You've got your commercial academic publishers. So that would include places like Routledge, Rowman and Littlefield, Palgrave. And there's some real overlap between what these commercial academic monograph publishers do and what university presses do, but there are some kind of key differences as well. You've got your large university presses like Oxford and Cambridge that are really multinational corporations, with thousands of employees. And then you've got your smaller university presses, which is like really most university presses in the United States fall into this latter category, and they can be anywhere from really tiny, even there are a few university presses out there with literally one employee, all the way up to a few dozen. Temple, we're sort of on the small side. We've got 11 employees, 3 editors, 3 acquiring editors, and that's my department, the acquisitions department. So you've got some choices about your publisher, and it's important that you do your homework, think through what's the right publisher for you. That's going to really help as you approach presses. It's best to be selective and not just kind of blast your proposal out to everybody. Some of this maybe is blindingly obvious, but I still give the advice because I think some people don't realize it. If you look at your own bookshelves and you see books that are in your discipline, your subdiscipline, and you see a publisher's logo recurring on those spines, that's a good indication that that's a press you should be targeting. Talk to people in your field, talk to your mentors, find out where they've published, what kind of experiences they've had with publishers and with individual editors. Some people have really clicked with individual editors and find that individual editors have interests. We have subfields that we're particularly interested in. And so some of that's clear from our website, but it can also help you to just chat with people who've had an experience with an individual editor and find out what that experience was like. Research your tenure committee's preferences. This can sometimes become an issue later in the process if you haven't done this in advance. Some committees will actually have a list of presses that they prefer over others. So that can obviously be important. I talked a little bit about this earlier, university presses versus commercial academic houses. There is some overlap between what we do and what commercial academic houses do. I think one thing that's diverged a little bit over the decades is that university presses are publishing fewer of the kind of really focused, narrow monograph type projects. And that's partly because the library market has dried up to a great extent. Library acquisition budgets are eaten to a great extent by STEM journals and that sort of thing. They don't have the money that they used to have to buy monographs, to buy books. So what university presses have started to do, and certainly this is true of Temple, is that everything we publish is a scholarly product and it has to advance scholarship in some way. But we're also looking for books that will appeal for undergraduate adoption, especially junior, senior level undergraduate adoption, graduate school adoption, graduate course adoption. We're not a textbook publisher, so we're not publishing those big intro books, but we want the books that we publish to appeal broadly to for adoption and even to the general public where that makes sense. So do your internet research. Again, that's obvious, but more specifically, I recommend that you find your way to the Association of University Presses website. Again, this is going to focus just on university presses, not on those commercial houses, but I still think it's a really useful resource. You see here, they've got a page devoted to finding a publisher. Within that is this really useful grid. So all along the top, you can see the names of the university presses, and then down the left-hand side are the disciplinary areas. And you just follow across and see which publisher focuses on which disciplinary area. So then you know that you're targeting, if you're sending out a proposal, you can be pretty confident that the press is at least going to be interested thematically in what you're doing. Approaching a publisher, an introduction from mentors can be useful. The next point, again, maybe this seems obvious, but it's surprising to me how infrequently it happens. If you can provide me with one paragraph that succinctly explains why your project is important, what your approach is going to be, that is just really useful for me across multiple applications within the consideration process. So it's useful for me at the outset. It's useful for me as I try to explain the project to colleagues within the press, as I eventually have to pitch it to our faculty editorial board, as I seek peer reviewers. So often we'll get overviews of the project that can run to multiple pages, and it's difficult for us. We know our disciplines, but we tend not to be PhDs in the areas that we're publishing. So we know our areas, but we don't have the level of expertise that you do. So we need to be kind of guided, especially because we receive a lot of proposals. We need to be kind of guided through what's really important about what you're doing. So do your research on what else the press has published that is relevant to your work, and mention those books in your cover letter, in your proposal. Again, that just shows me as an editor that you've done your research and that you're kind of being intentional about coming to Temple University Press. You're not just blasting out a proposal to every press you could find. Find the editor responsible for your discipline. That should be listed on the press website. And only email that person. Sometimes we'll have authors email everybody at the press, and that creates confusion on our end because I don't necessarily know that other editors have been contacted. And sometimes it's a little ambiguous which editor the project is most appropriate for, but we'll sort that out on our end. So just choose the one that you think looks most right. And if I think it's more appropriate for a different editor, I'll pass it along. So back to the idea of converting a dissertation into a book. What are we looking for? I think broadly speaking, we're looking again for something that's more expansive. The audience obviously for a dissertation can be a handful of people. For a book, we need it to be at least several hundred people, hopefully more. We want to see you reduce the lit review that you'd typically find in a dissertation, move it to footnotes, get rid of it entirely in some cases. You still need to frame how your book builds on what's come before it. But the kind of really detailed lit review can be, again, keep in mind that like smart college junior, that's going to be too much of a slog for them to get through. Explain in detail what you're going to do to change your dissertation into a book. Detail that in your proposal. How are you broadening the work? What additional directions are you taking? What kind of secondary literature can you bring in? Are you adding chapters? What are those chapters going to be? Really work on making the material read like a book, not like a dissertation. And that means unpacking jargon. Again, getting back to my example, smart college junior who is prepared to digest sophisticated material, but maybe doesn't have the background to understand the terminology. So you need to unpack that. Tell stories, really think about the transitions between chapters. So conclusions and introductions that guide the reader through how this chapter relates to the one that's going to follow it, and how it relates to the previous one, how the book fits together. On your proposal, again, I sort of talked about this already, but right at the top, get right to what's the point? Why should the editor care about this? Why should others care about this project? Think about the structure, think about how to guide uninitiated readers through the topic. Even if you haven't written the whole book yet, include an annotated table of contents that it's really helpful to have a big chunky paragraph on each chapter that explains, again, kind of how it fits in with the rest of the book. Even if the chapter doesn't exist yet, let us know what it's gonna be. If there's a book series at the press that you're interested in, say so. We have a lot of book series, and it's not, again, always obvious to us as it might be to you which series it would be most appropriate for. So, so if you have an idea along those lines, let us know. Sample chapters, you don't necessarily need to provide them at the initial contact, but if the press is interested, the editor is going to be asking you for chapters, pretty soon after you provide the initial proposal. So just at least be prepared to get started on revising those and having them, fairly ready to go in a form that you would be happy to see have a peer reviewer look at them. We don't really need to see the whole manuscript from the start. Try to guide us to what's most important. Look on the press's website for their proposal guidelines. These will be a little different from press to press. Here are NYU's, nice and succinct, and it sort of describes in broad strokes what you need to provide. Don't forget about market considerations. A lot of authors do. I think, again, I talked a little bit already about university presses are interested in books that can be adopted, but also, as a general matter, we just really want to know that the author is going to be a partner in the marketing and publicity side of the process. And especially for political scientists, this is a place where you can really shine, because we are often asking authors on our political science list to produce an op-ed, or to participate in some kind of media appearance related to their topic as kind of current events warrant. So doing book talks, being ready to do book signings if that's appropriate for the project. So just reassuring the editor and the marketing department at the press that you're going to be willing to participate in that and not be shy about trying to help the book sell. So I'm just going to skip this because I think I'm probably low on time here. But this is kind of an overview of the whole production process after the book is accepted and prepared to move into production. Broadly speaking, it takes about a year for most books once they're completely done before they appear in the warehouse. It can be a little bit less, be a little bit longer depending on the project. And this is just an additional resource at the Association of University Presses website. That's kind of like a Q&A section where people can ask questions about how to get a book published, and the association attempts to provide some answers. So I think that's my really fast version, and I'm sure I left a lot out, but that's my email address. If anybody has additional questions that we can't cover today, glad to hear from anyone, and would love to see proposals too.
Okay, next we'll hear from Andra Gillespie and Pearl Ford Dowe, and they'll talk about the National Review of Black Politics. Okay. So
Pearl,
Erin,
please feel free to start.
Yeah, Erin, can you stop sharing your screen? And then also, I want to say to the audience, please feel free to type your questions in the chat for the Q&A session at the end.
Andra, did you say me?
Yes.
Okay, see how my colleague does me, right? Okay, so good morning, everyone. Andra and I are the co-editors of the National Review of Black Politics, which is the journal published by NCOBPS. Over the last year, we have transitioned to a new press. We are now with University of California Press. So many of you probably who are members have received your printed copies from the last year and have seen us online. And so, so you probably have noticed a difference in how the journal looks. However, we are still committed to publishing works around in Black politics. And this is Black politics, not just only in American politics, but also from a comparative and international focus. So we do publish articles that focus on the diaspora as well. And so just that leads to a few points that I wanted to mention, because I think Sharon's goal for today is to talk about strategies in publishing, as well as when we transition to conversation about tenure and promotion. One of the things that I think Andra and I have noticed, as far as this is our first year doing this, we just completed our first year, is that in looking at the articles that we have received, one of the things that I will say to you, particularly those of you that are in graduate school and some of you that are just starting out on the tenure track, is that you need to have a sense of the scope of the journal that you're submitting to. Do not assume that if a journal has a particular title that it matches what it is that you're talking about. A lot of the journals over the last few years have become very narrow in their focus. And so do not assume that if it is published by the Southern Political Science Association, that they're publishing articles readily on Southern politics and Black politics, because JOP, which I'm talking about, they have a high desk rejection, and they're really not publishing those type of articles. And same with other journals that 5 years ago they were publishing very broadly in American politics or electoral politics, and they're not doing that now. So you need to really do your research on will your article fit there. And the reason we say that is because you don't want to lose time, because some of the larger journals have a large influx of articles. And so it may take a while for you to get a response back from an editor about if the article is going to fit and if they're going to actually submit it for review. So you want to do that work on the front end. Also, you want to make sure your article is publishable, meaning that it is clean. That you have done as much work making that article sound structurally, as well as just making it a clean copy. And just those are small things. And you'd be amazed at how many times we have received articles where we had to email the author and say, can you send us a blind copy? Those are small things that can slow down your process in getting your article reviewed. Making sure that in your structure that you have a clear hypothesis. I mean, these are small things that we think about, or now, those of us that are more senior think are very common, but I think to what Aaron's point was, which I appreciate, was many of you are going to be publishing work coming from your dissertation. And so not only do you have to think about how that's going to translate to a book, but some of you may not go the book route. Some of you may want to actually make those into articles. So you've got to make sure that your articles are consistent with the structure that we have as a standard in political science of what we're expecting to see. And sometimes you can miss that. And so definitely take the time to do that. Definitely take the time to have someone read your article. Consult with someone, whether it is your mentor or a peer who has been publishing, to give you a sense of feedback about, is this ready to be submitted? Does it need another round of revisions? Do you need to go to a conference and get more feedback? So those are things that you want to do, because the more work you do on the front end, it can help us as editors when we receive the article. And another reason why it helps us as reviewers, as editors, is that when we send these articles out for review, this is a cyclical relationship, right? And so we're sending out these blind reviews. And if a reviewer is having a difficult time with the articles that we're sending out, they're not likely to review again, right? And so one of the things that we in this relationship is that you want a speedy review process, and we want reliable reviewers that are going to commit to reviewing. And if they know, and so we're a small community of scholars. And so that helps with our reputation if we're getting in these articles that are of quality. So we ask for you to kind of help with that process, particularly for our journal. because we are in this stage of pretty much rebranding ourselves. And so we are a small community of scholars that really study Black politics. So we're oftentimes having to ask many of the same reviewers to come back to us more quicker than a larger journal such as APSR. And so all these small little technical small things are part of being really collegial in this process. And so we ask you to think about that as well. Also, there's some other things about journal etiquette as well. Just in the process of how you communicate with the editors. When you have questions, we do not have a problem answering questions, but there are times where we will get questions in which there's almost a demand placed on us that we have to respond in a particular type of way. That does not carry a lot of favor with a lot of editors. Andra and I, because of the fact that we are part of this NCOBPS community, we have a very humane approach to editing and to this process. A lot of reviewers and a lot of journals don't have that. So you want to also be conscious of the fact that you are not, when you're sending an inquiry, which you have the right to inquire about, but you have to understand there's a process to this. When you submit, you're not necessarily going to get a response back the same day. Some systems have automatic responses that you'll say, oh, we've received it. Some systems don't. The system that Andra and I are using that's built in through University of California Press does not give you that. And that's something that we don't have any control over. But we do try to let you know as soon as possible that you do have, that the article is going out for review. So I just want you just to understand that every issue, every journal is going to be different. Every journal is using a different platform. There are some things the editors can control. There's some things the editors cannot control. And so how you inquire, when you inquire is also important. Because there are people who are not in our space right now who are not kind to the work that we do, and they could care less if it's published or not, right? And so that's just a fact of the nature of political science, unfortunately. So you have to be mindful of that. Also, one of the things I want to say, and let Andra add to this, is that you also have to sometimes think outside the discipline. Some of us publishing in Black politics, because I work in disciplinary, you may have to go to a sociology journal sometimes. Okay, we want you to come in RVP first, but there are some things that you're working on that may not always fit all nice in a nice one political science. So for example, Sekou and I had an article a few years ago, and we pushed that article every place. We could not get it anywhere. And Sekou said, this may fit better in a sociology journal. We sent it to Race and Sociology, hit the first review. So sometimes you have to also think about that as well. So sometimes we want you to publish in political science, but especially to what Aaron's point was, you have to know what your departments are expecting. But sometimes there may be a piece that you're working on that you can get in a quality journal that's interdisciplinary. So you also have to think about that as well. So don't get so locked in that it has to be in this particular journal. Sometimes your work may not fit in that journal. So that requires you having a sense of what your department wants, having a conversation with your department chair, as well as your peers about where some of your work may be better placed and how to navigate that process. So I'm going to stop there and see if Andra has anything else to add.
So, well, thank you for that. I'll just add a couple things to what Pearl has said, and to kind of piggyback on this point about know the journal. Everybody's career has, in terms of their publications, you have sometimes your big marquee things, and then you have sometimes your smaller, more niche things. And then there are certain biases in the discipline about what types of things, should go in an APSR, an AJPS, or JLP versus what is actually supposed to go to the specialty journals. And so it's important to know, and I'm sure Sharon and Valeria will kind of speak to this. If you're doing kind of like a standard, I'm applying an existing theory and replicating something in this particular environment, the specialty journals actually are a good place for that. APSR is usually looking for something that's kind of game changing. That's something where it's new, people haven't done it before types of situations. And so one of the things that I want to encourage graduate students to do, especially for the specialty journals like ours, is to realize that this is actually a good place to publish. And you're going to get a lot of pressure in sometimes to try to get a JOP in graduate school. You'll get a job without a JOP in graduate school. You might need a JOP in order to keep a job, depending on where you are, if you're at a PWI R1, but you won't necessarily need that right off the bat to get a job. So, but if you've got like a game-changing article, I'm not going to discourage you from doing that, but I also want to discourage you from turning your nose up at the JREPs, the NRBPs, and the PGIs, because these are actually really good homes. And this is where we actually read stuff. Like, I do look at my JOP when it shows up, or I, look at my APSR to see who's published in there, but I'm not necessarily thinking that I'm surprised when I see something that is necessarily of interest to me when I see that. And that's no offense to sort of people who are here. It's just, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that they have to do because it's the, it's the big association journal that doesn't have anything to do with what I'm interested in or what I'm researching. And it's fine and it's good for them, but this is where you can kind of regularly publish. So I do want to encourage people to not replicate the same type of snobbery that you might see amongst your colleagues by saying I'm never going to publish in JREP or PGI or NRBP, because that's not cool, and that doesn't actually help us sort of have control over what gets published. But as I tell people to do that, one of the things that I want to encourage folks to do, and I think Pearl was actually being very kind in terms of how she said it, is to remember that the same people who review for APSR and AJPS and JOP also review for NRBP and PGI. So you need to send your best there. This is not something where you send crap work and then get an attitude when people tell you got to revise it, right? You need to be performing high level work all the time, regardless of what journal it is that you're submitting to. And that helps us. One, it reflects better on you, but then two, it helps us to make the case to sometimes a hostile academy that we are doing quality scholarship. So you have to sort of be mindful of that. And part of that is the professionalism of making sure that you take your name off of your paper, that you de-identify yourself. If you're citing your previous work, we have missed that and gotten caught on that a couple of times. So making sure that you're doing everything that you would do if you were submitting to APSR or AJPS. In that respect. The other thing is good citizenship. So I think part of that is sending stuff to the journal, and that includes senior people. But it's also, if you're asked to reviewing it. Everybody is busy. And I don't want to make claims about your time relative to mine, but I am somewhat frustrated by friends who are always busy and never can do anything. This is not this all runs because of faculty governance. That's true in our colleges and universities. That's also true in terms of our professional organizations and in terms of our journal management. So people are going to have to make the time. And if people are honest about their time constraints, we usually give people a month to return a review. People can negotiate. And I will confess, because Sharon can tell you, because I just did it, right? You can be hounded and be like, oops, I forgot. I'm sorry. Let me go take care of this now. We all understand. So I wouldn't use we say 4 weeks, but you need 4.5 or 5 weeks. Usually if you tell somebody that, they will be like, okay, we understand. But that is also making sometimes some of the people who are submitting anxious, because they're like, my thing's been out for 3 months. It's yeah, reviewer number 3 is trifling and won't get back to you and tell us what's going on. So we can't give you a decision on that. And we've had to tell people that. And I've been trifling reviewer number 3. So, just make sure that you are keeping up your end of the bargain, understanding that part of being an academic is reviewing other people's work, and you can't be a prima donna or protect your time in that kind of way where you're refusing to reciprocate. In terms of thinking about quality, one of the things that I want to say on behalf of NRBP is that NCOBPS has a newsletter. And if you want to write op-eds, we have great resources to sort of channel. So like your papers are not op-eds. So, and we've desk rejected because people wrote stuff that wasn't actually scholarly or empirical. And so I think, again, that is keeping with quality, right? This is not just a line on your vita. This is supposed to be actual scholarship. So please make sure that you do that. And, one of our commitments to you is to try to work with people as much as possible. This doesn't mean that we don't reject, because we have rejected, we have desk rejected if it's appropriate to do so. But one of the things that we're committed at NRBP of doing is that if you get an R&R, especially like a major revision review, that will give you a chance to revise and then if necessary to go through another round of revisions in order to get it where it is. Now, after 2 R&Rs, like we can't do anything. And you might need to go back and start at the drawing board again, but like we want to sort of be helpful in that particular way. Not every journal is necessarily going to do that, but we want to make sure that we're doing that. And even when our system doesn't allow us to say that, our letters usually indicate, look, that this here is what's going on here. We really want you to take the feedback that you're getting seriously and be attentive to it, because you don't want to waste an opportunity to revise a second time because you just are dug into your heels. And one of the things I will say for any journal, if you get rejected from one place, just go send it to the next place. I mean, unless they're telling you something that's like really glaringly obvious that you need to fix immediately before you send this out again. If once you get a rejection, go find the next journal and submit it to and see what happens there. That's probably sort of the safest way to kind of like deal with that and address the heartache of rejection. So I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Pearl and Andra. And now we'll hear from Dr. Nadia Brown of Purdue University.
Hey everyone, hi. I'll keep this really quick because I want us to get to questions and answer, and I'm aware that we have about 15 minutes to do so. So again, I'm the lead editor of Politics, Groups, and Identities. And one of the selling points of our journal is that we really see publishing as mentoring. Right now, we're hosting a virtual community through the Western Political Science Association, where we are working with a set of 26 junior faculty. Some of them are pre-tenure, but the most are advanced graduate students, on giving them the ins and outs of how to publish. And every week, the last Friday of every month, we hold workshops. You're too late to be in part of that, but I live tweet out all of the great advice that has been given. So you can follow me, I'm Brown PhD Girl on Twitter, or you can also follow PGI_WPSA, who amplifies what I say. Other things I want to mention, you should think about PGI as a home for your work, because we got an impact factor, y'all. I am so thrilled to announce that. So sometimes we have people who were doing great work that should have been in our pages, but did not submit because we were a new journal that did not have an impact factor. So we don't know what the score is yet, because the impact factors roll out in June, but might be August this year due to COVID. But we do know that our mock impact factor places us at the bottom third of all political science and sociology journals, right? So I'm assuming we're going to come out with something that is pretty high, just off the rip. And it's thanks to y'all, right? It's a great community of scholars. We have, and we work really hard at cultivating our community of scholars. And it's not just a journal. It's like NCOBPS, we're a family. It's a different kind of PGI thing. And I'm a graduate of Howard University, like Pearl, and our saying at Howard is we never lost the party. I lost a lot of games, but we have never lost the party. And the same goes true for PGI. So I work really, really hard at creating an environment that brings people together through socializing, that allows people to see themselves connected to the scholarship and other scholars, as opposed to this anonymized reviewer on the other end, right? Or this author that no one cares about the feelings, right? So we look at how things are being worded. The CEs and I try to distill for authors how to best improve their papers, given the feedback from the reviewers. So we don't just give you, look at what the reviewer said and you figure out your way forward. It's a very deliberate, like, okay, this is how the editorial team sees you moving forward. And if you're able to do that, let's work together. Like Andra mentioned, we're very, I mean, it's COVID, we have to be flexible, right? So if you need longer to resubmit an R&R, if you're a reviewer who needs more time to review, we will always work with you. One of the reasons why I think you should publish with PGI is that we are an innovative journal. We're young, we're new, we could do a lot of what we want to do. And so we do. So you probably saw us on social media, particularly on Instagram and Twitter. We've published microsyllabi readings just straight from things we've published, such as the Black Lives Matter syllabus that no other journal in political science could do, because we've had so much content over our 7 years around Black Lives Matter, right? Taking seriously, treating Black folks humanely. So we were able to put this out as soon as, unfortunately, as soon as George Floyd was murdered, right? So this came out very, very soon after. We've also done a microsyllabi on indigenous politics. How many other political science journals can say that they have enough articles to publish on this matter, right? So we are innovative. Those microsyllabi are ungated, which means it drives it drives readers to your piece, so that for y'all that are pre-tenure or looking at going up for promotion, it drives up your H factor, your H index, right? Because it's getting more citations, more views on your work. So we are really trying to publish folks and promote folks, right? So we are being really innovative. We promote your work on social media. So, right, like you should be doing this too, as my my unsolicited advice, but PGI does it for you. So we have a team of social media, we have a social media team who looks at our journal, looks at the news, and then links current events to articles that we published, and we tweet them out. And we are a journal who has seen a rise in number of policymakers who have clicked on our articles to talk to our authors. We are a journal that has had several of our authors be interviewed by the media, and have had kind of making this connection to public facing work just off of how we are promoting our own authors. And again, it's not just to get you published, but it's to get you promoted. The last thing I'll mention is one of the mantras that have come through this year, particularly through this WPSA community. All of our PGI speakers, our editorial team, that they've been people from our international advisory board and our advisory board, have all had this running mantra is PGI, don't be a jerk. And I think we're going to get like some swag or some cups or something with like this printed on it, because this really does fit with our ethos. It's treat people nicely, right? So you give good reviews. If you are talking to the editor, like Pearl mentioned earlier, right? It's not coming full aggressive to ask questions that can be resolved in a really reasonable way. And it's also about the politics of citation, right? At PGI, we're not going to require you or ding you for citing folks that we have known to be abusers and harassers in the discipline just because they are the expert in the field. But if it's more relevant for you to be citing and engaging the work of people, particularly in this NCOBPS community, in your first 2 pages, or particularly the first paragraph of your paper, do that, right? So the politics of citation matters. And that's our way of trying to rechannel the discipline into not always propping up those that are jerks, that are bad actors, or people that don't take seriously the claims of work by us in this community, right? People that do work on BIPOC folk. So this mantra of don't be a jerk, I think it has legs, and hopefully it spreads beyond just PGI and it moves to the larger discipline. So I'll stop there. Thanks again for the opportunity, Sharon.
All right, thank you, Nadia. And so finally, Valeria, Sinclair-Chapman, and I will talk about the APSR. So Valeria.
So thank you. This has been a really helpful panel. So thank you for having me. I love being in good company and seeing so many people joining us to have this conversation. So much has been said already, so I'll just try to add my 2 cents briefly. So one way to think about your journal article is that you're entering a conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue with other scholars in your field of study, or in your, who work on scholarship that's similar to yours. And so when you're doing that, you can think about who do you need to be in conversation with. As editors, we use some of that information to sort out who we should send your papers to if we decide to send it out for review. So one of the things that you should consider, certainly send us your polished work, your good work. It's really hard for us to send out material that is not that. I have worked with Nadia at PGI. I'm so glad to hear about the impact factor. That's amazing. APSR is a different kind of beast, right? APSR has a rejection and acceptance rate of 5%, right? And so most things that we're getting are not going to make it into the pages of the journal. But there are, there's pathways in. If you don't send it, we can't even take a look at it. We have a new team right now that is really committed to being more thoughtful as editors, to try to get scholars and papers from different kinds of subfields, people of diverse racial and ethnic background. And so we really want to encourage you to submit your papers to us. We're trying to be thoughtful in the kind of feedback that we get. For a long time, APSR and AJPS and JOP, those were journals that didn't feel like they had to go out and shake the bushes to get submissions. But we are doing that work. We want the journal to be more representative of the discipline. We want all of us in this room to be able to turn to the APSR and say, oh, what's interesting to me here, instead of thinking that it's really a journal that is of interest of a small set of people in the discipline. Just in terms of some strategies, cite pieces from the journal that you're submitting to, if possible. It's helpful. One of the things that we do, at least at APSR, we get hundreds of manuscripts a year, probably 1,000 this year, I would say, Sharon, maybe closer to 1,200 or 1,500 this year. And so we're getting so many manuscripts. If we want to send your paper out for review, you can help us by telling us who you're in conversation with. That happens in the first few pages of your manuscript. We're looking at your literature review. You can tell us, this is the big conversation that's happening. These are the people who could review or make comments on this to make this a stronger piece. So you might cite Robert C. Smith, but you need to also cite the people who cite Robert C. Smith so that we can send it to them. You might cite Bob Putnam, but we need for you to cite the people who cite Bob Putnam, right? And so I think those are some of the strategies that you might want to consider. I'm looking at, let's see, we already talked about blinding your manuscript and cleaning up your writing. Remember, as well as a strategy for you, we talked about it a little bit differently, but 3 people are reading your manuscript plus the editor, right? And so you really, if you get a rejection, that's three or 4 people that have read it and said it's not going to work. That is not the entire world. So you do need to be ready to send it back out again so that you can get more feedback. I'm going to see if there's anything that I have here that hasn't been said. Let's see. I think I will say this one last thing, that at APSR, we're often, in other journals too, the individuals who are sending out your manuscript for review, we're working with them and we're making the final decisions, but it's often editorial assistance. So if you can consider that there's a graduate student out there trying to sort out what's a good fit for your manuscript, help them out too. You can specifically suggest reviewers. We won't send it to all of the reviewers that you suggest. If it's obvious, you don't have to put those people in your suggested reviewer list, but you can help us sort out who are the good people that can read your manuscript, and that can, and probably 1 or 2 of them will get into our reviewer pool. So I think that's about it for me. I suppose one more thing, and maybe Sharon, you could talk about kind of the scope of the journal. We really are looking for cutting edge work. We have a high desk reject rate. We try to be thoughtful even in the desk rejects as well. In terms of some strategies, you can maybe think of, co-authorships, even though I think individual manuscripts are cleaner when you're going up for tenure. But certainly even working in symposia or doing the kind of workshops that PGI offers, probably the other journals as well, to help get your manuscript ready for publication. I think those are some of the useful strategies.
All right, I just had a couple, I think everybody pretty much has touched on everything, and I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. We have about maybe about 15 minutes left, but I just wanted to say I think it's a good idea to present your work at conferences like NCOBPS and others, but I would suggest that you submit your, present your work at least 2 conferences. Find someone either in your department or at NCOBP or some other organization to be your mentor that could also look at it and give you feedback. Most of you, especially if you're a student in your department, I know in our department, we have research presentations, and we allow faculty and grad students to present their work. So present your work and get feedback from your colleagues. So get as much feedback as possible, because the goal is to make sure when you send it to the APSR that it at least gets sent out for review. And another thing I think that Valeria mentioned is to make sure that you suggest reviewers, because that's one thing that I didn't know when I was in grad school, and even when I was a young professor, that you could suggest people to review your articles, because I used to always wonder how certain people kept publishing in these top journals over and over, but their work didn't seem to be any better than anyone else's. And the reason is because they were able to suggest people who were familiar with their work, and maybe even suggest their friends, I guess, who would write good things about their work. So make sure that you send it to people, and that you get good reviewers, and also that you are willing to review. That's one problem we've been having, especially during this pandemic. I think at all of our journals, everybody is so overwhelmed and so busy that it's hard to find reviewers. So if you are also willing to review for the APSR, make sure you go to our website and sign up, because that's something that we really need. So I'm going to go ahead and just look at the questions that we have in the chat, and feel free to type your questions here. One person asked, is it common for book publishers to ask authors to pay a publishing fee? So Aaron, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, it's not unheard of. I can just speak for Temple. We would never, as a matter of course, ask for a fee. For us, we call it a subvention. And it's a subsidy that's really only for books that have some kind of extraordinary production requirement connected to them. So if it needs to be in color for some reason, or if it needs to have 100 photos, or if it needs to be 600 pages long, it's going to be very hard for us to make our money back on books that have that sort of extraordinary production requirement. But I would say for us at Temple, the vast bulk of our books do not require a subsidy. I believe there are some publishers that make a subvention sort of part of their standard practice, and that may just be how they have to function. I guess I would just say, scholarly book publishing is just a more and more challenging business every year. So while it might seem like asking a lot, we are required to cover our costs. And so speaking for those publishers that may require that as a matter of course, I given the environment we're in now, I sort of understand why they're doing it. But for us, it's not a standard practice.
If I could just add one thing to that. So for legitimate subvention costs, like the ones that Aaron just mentioned, you may be able to ask your dean for that. They usually do have a fund for subvention funds. Sort of the most common place where it happened is, yes, if you have things that need permissions, you, the author, are responsible for paying for like those permissions in order to be able to get it. So in like my first book, I had an editorial cartoon that I really wanted in there. I was the one who paid to make sure that we had the permission in order to be able to do that. Or if you pay somebody else to do your index, then that's a standard thing that you can use it for. If this is one of those international presses that requires some money up front to review your book, that's not going to count towards tenure for you anyway. So stay away from that. Like a legitimate university press that you need, isn't going to require that kind of stuff. But I know you might get those random email solicitations for things that look sketchy. They probably are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to add, make sure it's not a scam. I mean, that is something you have to
Yeah.
watch out for. And that also goes back to checking with your tenure committee and making sure that the press you're considering is someone who they will recognize.
Okay. And then I think Nadia just typed something that she just said, in my experience, the dean or department chair will ask you to use your startup funds, if you have any, before getting subvention funds. All right, so the next question that we have, if you publish articles from your dissertation, is it possible to still make it a book project? And, or if you want the dissertation to be a book, should the articles be offshoots? So I guess the person is asking, you know, if you publish articles, can you also publish a book? Can you do them both from your
Yeah,
dissertation?
you can. I mean, again, I can only speak for my press on this, but I think it applies pretty broadly. I would rather have most of the, you know, the most of the book be original. But if there's, let's say it's a 10-chapter book, if there are 1 to maybe as many as 3 chapters that have appeared as articles, I'll still be okay with that. You know, or at least it won't cause me to say no out of hand. But yeah, as a general matter, the more of the manuscript that's original, the better, you know, because it makes it easier for us to attract buyers.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But,
Next question. How do you get a piece of work in front of an audience that will most likely have opposing or different views?
I think, oh, Andra, will you get ready? Go ahead. Oh, I think conference presentations are a good place to do that. When you're presenting at a conference, there's a small audience that is interested enough in your paper that they're going to get up at 8 in the morning to do it, or, you know, some other time they're going to take away from when they could be sightseeing in San Francisco, right? So if they're in the room, then they are likely to be paying attention. And that is a way, I think, to get contrary views. If you can't find it in that way, then probably even in your own department, you will get the skepticism that you need. I think a healthy dose of skepticism is useful for us to improve our own writing and our own thinking. And certainly advisors or other kinds of colleagues, you need for people, you know, when people show love, it's in the margins of your papers, right? And so the folks that are saying only how wonderful it is, you also need the critique, even though it might actually be wonderful. So take the good news too. So.
All right. Is it inappropriate to send a book proposal and sample chapters to multiple presses at the same time?
For us, it's we don't forbid that. Some presses do require exclusive submissions, so definitely check with the press, check with the editor, and find out what their standards are, what their requirements are. We just ask if it's a multiple submission, we ask you to be upfront with us about that. And once we've expended resources on it, sending it out for peer reviews, which we pay for, we ask that you allow our process to play out and give us a chance to get it in front of our editorial board before you make a decision to go with another press. So that's our approach.
All right. When you suggest reviewers for a political science journal, do they have to be political science faculty? I'm thinking in relation to publishing interdisciplinary work.
No, it's what PGI, we look for reviewers outside of political science. And so you can suggest reviewers that are the most appropriate for your work, and they don't have to be in a disciplinary home.
Okay.
You know, at the same time, at least one of them is going to have to be a political, I mean, just for grounding's sake, it's probably going to be that case. The other thing is we've encountered this. I don't know if Nadia has, but when we ask people in other disciplines to review our work, they're usually one of the first ones to tell us no. So, I mean, people are going to look at the journal and they're going to look at what they're familiar with. And in particular, if they're not familiar with our journals, and they need to tell somebody no, they would be more likely to turn us down as opposed to somebody who's in their disciplinary wheelhouse who they know.
Okay.
Or if they respond, then there's sometimes like it might not work the way that you imagine that it was worked. I've reviewed for sociology. It's a very different kind of conversation, I think, that the journal editors want. when I've had sociologists or economists or health, whatever, folks who do like high-powered statistical methods review for the APSR, I've not seen it work out positively. It's not to say that it can't. Nadia is saying that it does typically work out for PGI, but there are some risk involved. But if they're part of the conversation that your manuscript is in, then I think that makes good sense to do it. If you're citing that person and they're part of that that discussion, then it probably is helpful.
Okay. Is there a comprehensive list of journals from the NCOBPS member departments and other entities? This may be useful for faculty and students seeking to publish one day.
That's a good idea. I don't know of one, but one of the things that I will say when you're thinking about where you want to publish, again, it's been said already, look at the spines, and we pay much more attention. My mom did not understand this when I went through a hellish tenure thing where I had to prove that NYU press was a good press, which was a stupid discussion, but my mom was like, I remember she read my letter and she was like, I never pay attention to what's on the spine. And it's like, we spend a lot of time paying attention to what's on the spine. Also pay attention to what you're reading. So if you find yourself reading things in certain journals, that's probably, and you're responding to them, that's actually a good home for you to sort of figure out that this is a good place for you to be submitting your work.
Okay, this is a question I forgot to ask. Is there a preferred time or season for submission of articles or book proposals, fall or summer?
So we get slammed. Oh, sorry, Aaron.
I'll just say not for book proposals, anytime.
And we get slammed when for submissions at winter break and summer break. So it makes sense, right? Faculty are off and you're finishing up your articles and sending them out. So, but unfortunately that coincides when many journals take a hiatus. So when we get back, so yes, you don't get your article in, let's say like January 3rd, we don't come back until January 20th, January 15th. So your things will not be processed until then. It doesn't mean, and we're also processing about 20 other articles at that time. Same thing for when we come back from summer hiatus. Doesn't mean don't submit it then. It just means that you're gonna be waiting till it gets sent out, and you'll be sent out with a bunch of other kind of asks. The times when we get the least amount of submissions are around midterms and finals.
Okay, and I'm checking the chat, and also feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Do any of you have any questions in particular about, or want us to say anything about the tenure process? Okay, so someone just put, I will submit, let me see, my tenure packet on September 1st. Do you have any advice? I'm at a regional university, so I do not have the same publishing requirements as Research One universities, but I still want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
I'll say something to that. So I have a joint appointment between Emory College and Oxford, which is our 2-year residential, which has a teaching focus. So one of the things that in the cases that go up from Oxford College is that our candidates really convey to the reviewers all levels of scholarship that they're doing. So you have scholarship of teaching and learning, now you have scholarship of discovery. So what does scholarship look like for your campus? And so you really want to convey that in your materials so that and guide the reviewer. Don't assume that because you're sending your dossier or to an external reviewer who may be at a similar institution, they may have a different tenure promotion standard. So you definitely want to speak to all the ways that you're contributing to scholarship. What does scholarship mean at your institution? And be very clear about that and state your case.
I think the other thing is that the burden of proof is on you to justify everything you've ever done. And so, yeah, you shouldn't have to explain how important NRBP or PGI is, and you shouldn't rely on your letter writers to say that for people. No, hopefully if they're doing their job, they do. You have to explain. This is one of the top specialty journals in my field. This is an up and coming journal that just got an impact factor. This press. So I would have to explain to my school, just because my department is snooty. Oh, I forgot this is recorded. That Temple University Press is a great press for REP, because in my department, people are like Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Yale, right? And I'm gonna have to justify that. I shouldn't have to justify that Temple is a good press in REP, but I'm gonna have to tell them that, so that they end up repeating it. And then it's a question of whether or not they buy. The same thing we'd have to do for SUNY. If we wanted to say in Black politics, like, no, this is where the luminaries publish, right? Because they would say State University of New York Press, we don't think that's a good school, period. And kind of move forward. So you have to do a lot of the explaining, and you have to make the case for yourself. You have to be your own best advocate in these situations. So for those who are just starting their jobs, right, you got to take notes and keep track records of everything. Because you might actually need to go back and use it later if somebody tries to, renege on something that they told you once before. But it's also a place where you need to document everything that you're doing, all of your public events, all of your teaching events, all of your interactions with students, just so that you can justify all of your time.
And I would add too that one way to substantiate your claims about where you published work, if you have already, is to be able to list other people who have published in that journal or in that at that press that are related to the work that you do. So then that that previous set of scholars and scholarship actually speaks on your behalf too. So I agree with Andra that you may need to spell it out, but I do think it's possible to do. And good luck submitting your packet.
And I also want to say that if you're going up for tenure or if you're going up for promotion to full, make sure you get people who are good reviewers, who will write really, really strong letters, because even if they write a positive letter, you might have a situation where someone in your department doesn't think you deserve to be promoted, and they'll even look at that brief positive letter and say, oh, well, okay, this person might be her friend or something. But make sure you get people who are going to not only write strong letters, who are going to talk about the importance of your work, but also write really, really strong and really long letters. Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and then I'm going to take this next question, but if you all, those of you who are associate professors, I'm thinking, when are you going up for full? Because that's one of the things that we really do need to do as Black scholars, is make sure that once you get to the associate level, it feels good to be promoted, to have tenure, to have that security, but to not stop there. So I think the question that I have is, like, what can this organization do to help all of our scholars, whether it be students or assistant professors or even associate professors, going up for full? So keep that in mind. But we have a question. In terms of having to spell this out with NRBP, does being with the University of California Press count towards prestige? Is that a prestigious? Okay. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, ultimately it's going to be the impact factor, and just knowing where you are, Felicity, sort of in the process. By the time you come up for a tenure, NRBP should have an impact score, so nobody should say anything to you. And I would say, as a graduate student right now, by all means, please submit things to the journal. I think that you will be fine. I mean, the thing that people care about ultimately, even without an impact score, is citations. And so if you write an article and people cite it because it's transformative and it's influential, that's ultimately what matters more than anything else.
Yeah, if I can add to that too, it's not the press when it comes to a journal, it's really the association. I mean, so those things, because the association works out the press that you're with. It's not the journal. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe.
I hear you. Right.
Yeah, and so so it really is that this is the premier journal of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. I mean, that I think is how you frame it. I forgot my other thought, so I will carry on.
But I will add, right, to what Valeria said, maybe this is the last part of her thought, is that it's up to you as the candidate to put that in the letter, right? So you will say, I've published this article, it has this many citations, and this article, the journal is the premier journal or the journal of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, right? And so you're the one who's spelling it out. And you should be, in my estimation, right, giving these having this talk with your chair or the person who is putting you up. Some places have like a mentor that then like will take your case forward. Talking to them early about this, and as an editor of PGI, I've written letters to department chairs or to that mentor to explain what PGI is, what we do, because right, we're just getting our impact factor. So for me to say, this is the number of citations that we get, this is the number of rejections that we have, right? Like really explaining that out. So if the journal doesn't have an impact factor by the time you come up, I would say write to the editors sooner than later, and so that you can get a letter in your file, or at least connect them. I've also spoken to department chairs directly, right? So just give them the email address or the telephone number after you've worked it out with the editors, right? So it's you doing the legwork. Unfortunately, right, our journals, it's not the same thing as the APSR, right? You don't have to do that kind of legwork. But if you're publishing here, which I think is a great space because you're actually getting the readership that will cite you, that will engage your work, that you're being in conversation with, which is a good place to, I think, to be as a junior scholar when you're starting out, and also when you're a senior scholar, right? Because we just really great. But you have to do that additional legwork that you wouldn't have to do if you were published at the APSR or JOP or something else.
I just want to jump into what I wanted to say, and Andra and Pearl, you guys can correct me, but the National Political Science Review should have had an impact factor, right? And so we are isn't the new journal connected to the previous journal, even if it doesn't have, well, so what I would, even though it's two different journals, I would say that this is a new journal from the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. I would draw a connection, because even though there's a divide there, I would at least try to say that this is not, some new upstart. This is a long-standing history in an important organization in political science. And so I think that that's part of it. And I want to say just one more thing about the kind of feedback that you get from specialty journals or more focused journals, like from NCOBPS and from the Western, is that you really get folks who take the time to read your work and take it seriously, and you get editors that are taking their time to place your paper with good reviewers, with thoughtful reviewers. And so there is really something to be said for having a wide array of a broader strategy towards publication that begins and is really deeply embedded in these kinds of spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that for business purposes, one, UC Press doesn't own NPSR, and then remember, because of that whole weird transaction was a book and not a journal article, like there wasn't any citation.
Okay, you're right.
All of that. I mean, I mean, and so it's that business structural stuff that like actually ends up like this tail, which is why we ended up with UC Press in the first place.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I just want to mention briefly that we didn't get to talk about with the APSR is that we also are involved in promoting our authors on social media. We have a social media editor and also some students who help us. So I think a good idea for you if you're thinking about trying to submit to the APSR is just think about just trying to make us aware of the fact that your work is cutting edge and make it possible for us to be able to promote it on social media, because that's what I think a lot of journals are doing.
And I will say that PGI is at the cutting edge of that. So PGI is really setting the standard for social media interactions. It's impressive and it's good work.
Yeah, that's the former co-lead editor.
All right, one final question. Is there any publication recommendations for those who do qualitative work, given the strong quantitative trends in the discipline? One thing about the APSR is we now are more willing to publish qualitative work. So just because your work is qualitative, don't let that discourage you from submitting it to us. But when anyone else, I think we're pretty much out of time, but do anyone of the rest of you want to recommend places to publish qualitative work?
We just accepted an article this week that's qualitative. It's based on focus group stuff. So yeah, I mean, we don't have any, methodological bias in that particular way. The one thing that I will point out is that, especially if you go to AJPS, and so I'm saying this sort of as a member of the Midwest Executive Board, is because they're part of DART, that data transparency movement, they are going to require that you turn in your field notes so that they can read them, which I got feelings about. So, but just be mindful of that. But yeah, NRBP publishes quantitative and qualitative work.
Okay.
I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm an interpretivist. I'm not even a positivist qualitative researcher. PGI has published my things way before I was the co-lead editor and lead editor. We also look for that kind of scholarship now. We are also open to other modes of humanistic inquiry. So not just, again, qualitative research in a positivist vein. So please consider PGI home if you're doing that kind of work.
All right, so I think we're about out of time, but if you have any questions about Temple University Press, feel free to contact Erin, or if you have questions about any of our journals, feel free to email us. And thank you all. This was a very well attended panel too. I hope you all learned a lot, and thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
It's good
Thank
to see
you.
everybody too.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be together
We'll
next
have
year in
lunch.
person.
Yeah, I can't wait. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye.